They said the old castle on the cliffs was cursed just stone, wind, and ghosts of the sea. But when a war veteran and his loyal husky moved in, something ancient woke beneath the waves. A melody long forgotten began to rise again. A song that would save lives and heal a broken soul. Where are you watching from today? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances. The road to Harbor's Rest wound like an old scar through the pine-covered cliffs of Maine's northern coast. The morning fog clung low to the ocean, veiling the jagged rocks below. Above them stood the silhouette of Ravenshore Keep, a crumbling stone fortress perched at the edge of the world, its spires reaching toward a sky the color of pewter. In the cab of a weathered Ford pickup sat Caleb Merritt, hands tight on the wheel, his breath slow and deliberate. His 6-year-old husky Balto rested his head on the passenger seat, eyes open and alert. The dog's fur was a mix of gray and white, like frost over ash, his eyes a pale blue that reflected the fog itself. Caleb hadn't planned to end up here. A tax auction, a number on a screen, and a half-hearted bid had led him to the deed of a castle no one wanted. Abandoned since 1927, sold as is, the listing had said. Most men would have laughed. Caleb didn't laugh much these days. He parked at the base of the hill and stepped out. The salt wind bit into his cheeks, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and seaweed. Balto leapt down after him, tail low but wagging once, cautiously. Together they looked up at the keep, its towers crooked with age, its windows black as hollow eyes. "Well, buddy," Caleb murmured, his voice hoarse from years of shouting commands that no longer mattered. "Home, apparently." Balto sniffed the air and gave a soft, uncertain whine. Inside, the heavy oak doors groaned open with a noise that sounded like an exhale. The great hall was vast and cold, shafts of light piercing through fractured stained glass, scattering colored ghosts across the dust. Every step Caleb took echoed against the vaulted ceiling. On the far wall hung a massive portrait, a man with storm-gray eyes and a trimmed beard, dressed in 19th century naval attire. Below the painting, a bronze plaque read, "When the wind sings, the lost shall find their shore." Caleb read it twice. Then again. He wasn't sure why it felt like it was meant for him. Balto padded around the perimeter, nose low, tail straight. The dog paused near a vent in the stone floor, sniffing hard. A deep rumble vibrated beneath their feet, faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Caleb crouched and placed his hand on the stone. It was warm. "Still alive, huh?" he muttered. "Guess that makes 2 of us." That night, he built a small fire in the hearth, though most of the heat escaped through unseen cracks. Balto curled near the flame, while Caleb sat with a tin mug of coffee, studying the folded papers that had come with the deed. "Ravenshore Keep," the pamphlet said. "Built in 1889 by Jonathan Ravenshore, naval engineer and philanthropist. Designed to channel wind currents through a network of acoustic vents to warn ships of approaching storms." Caleb rubbed his thumb over the name. Something in it tugged at him, though he couldn't say why. Hours later, as the fire dimmed, Balto lifted his head suddenly, ears sharp, his eyes fixed on the far wall. A low growl rolled from his chest. Caleb followed his gaze, just as a deep vibration hummed through the room. It was low, resonant, and steady, a tone too perfect to be random. The old windows rattled. The air thickened, humming softly, as if the castle itself was singing. Caleb stood frozen, every instinct torn between fight and awe. Balto tilted his head and howled, a long, haunting note that seemed to harmonize with the vibration. When silence finally returned, Caleb exhaled. "Guess you found the key, huh, girl?" Balto's tail thumped once before she settled again, eyes still open. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the broken windows in golden ribbons. The fog had lifted, revealing the vast Atlantic stretching endlessly below. Caleb brewed another cup of coffee on his camp stove and carried it outside. The castle loomed behind him, its walls alive with the whispers of the sea breeze. That was when he heard the crunch of bicycle tires on gravel. He turned to see Martha Connolly, the town librarian, approaching in a moss-green coat and knit cap. Her silver hair gleamed in the sunlight. "You must be the soldier who bought Ravensshore," she said, resting the bike against a tree. "Half the town thinks you're brave. The other half thinks you've lost your mind." Caleb smiled faintly. "Could be both." She poured coffee from her thermos and handed him a cup. "The Ravensshores were builders of light and sound," she said, gazing at the keep. Jonathan believed wind carried voices, that it could warn, comfort, even guide. They say the castle sang during storms, saving ships that would have otherwise broken on the rocks. Caleb nodded slowly. "And what happened after?" Martha's smile faded. "The singing stopped. Maybe the wind stopped listening." Balto trotted up beside Caleb, nose twitching at the stranger, but her tail wagged once, recognizing the kindness in Martha's tone. Martha took a folded newspaper from her satchel. "You might want this," she said, handing it to him. "Story from 1892. They called this place the Belle of the Atlantic." As she mounted her bike to leave, she added, "If you ever hear it again, listen. Some say the wind only speaks to those it still trusts." That evening, Caleb stood alone at the cliff's edge, the ocean roaring below. The words from the plaque echoed in his mind. "When the wind sings, the lost shall find their shore." The wind rose, sweeping through the hollow turrets. The castle moaned low, resonant, alive. Balto lifted her head and howled. Caleb closed his eyes and whispered, "Then maybe it's time I found mine." And as dusk fell over Ravensshore Keep, the air trembled with a sound that was neither storm nor ghost, but something older, purer, waiting to be understood. The next few days at Ravensshore Keep passed in a kind of haunted peace. The weather shifted constantly, mist one hour, sharp blue sunlight the next. The sea below roared and whispered by turns, as though trying to speak in a language Caleb Merritt almost remembered. He had begun to clear the debris from the great hall, pulling down old boards, sweeping dust that had probably settled since Theodore Roosevelt was president. Balto followed him everywhere, moving between shafts of light and shadow, nose pressed close to the stone. Sometimes the dog would stop, tail low, head tilted toward the walls, listening, always listening. On the fourth morning, Caleb found the door to the cellar. It was a heavy iron slab, half buried behind fallen planks and crates, the lock corroded with age. He worked at it with a crowbar until the hinges gave way, with a metallic cry. A chill rose from below, a scent of salt, rust, and something ancient. "Stay close," Caleb murmured. The staircase wound downward, the steps slick with moss. He carried a lantern, its circle of light catching faint carvings in the walls, spirals, stars, and something like musical notes etched in stone. Balto padded quietly ahead, her paws soundless on the cold floor. At the bottom, the passage opened into a broad circular chamber. The air was still but alive with some hidden vibration, like the silence after a deep bell has been struck. On the far wall, Caleb saw words carved so faintly they seemed to shimmer when the lantern flame wavered. "When the wind sings, the lost shall find their shore." He traced the grooves with his fingers. They were deep, deliberate. Whoever carved them had meant for them to endure. "Jonathan Ravensshore," Caleb whispered, "you really did believe in ghosts of sound, didn't you?" Balto gave a short bark and began pawing at the base of the wall. The echo carried strangely in the chamber sharp, then returning a half-beat later, lower, softer, almost like harmony. The dog froze suddenly, ears up, head cocked. Caleb heard it too, a low hum rising through the floor, steady, rhythmic, impossibly alive. Before he could react, Footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. He turned sharply, hand instinctively going to the utility knife on his belt. "Easy," a woman's voice called. "I'm not trespassing. At least not intentionally." The light from another lantern spilled into view, and Evelyn Hart appeared, descending the last few steps. She was in her 30s, tall and steady-eyed, her brown hair pulled back under a knit beanie. Her parka bore the faded logo of Boston Acoustic Research Institute. "I heard the town gossip," she said with a hint of a smile. "Figured anyone who managed to wake up Ravenshore was either a genius or a lunatic. I study infrasonic resonance. I had to see it." Caleb exhaled slowly, lowering his guard. "Guess that makes me the latter. Or the bridge between both," she said. Then she noticed the dog and crouched slightly. "And you must be the famous Balto." The husky sniffed her glove and wagged once, as if granting permission. Evelyn opened a small metal case she carried and began unpacking instruments. Microphones, vibration sensors, a portable analyzer that blinked green. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked quietly. "The air moves differently here." "I thought it was my imagination," Caleb admitted. "Imagination doesn't register at 12 hertz, she said, checking her screen. "This place is alive." They spent hours exploring the tunnels. Evelyn explained that the keep's design wasn't random each corridor, and vent had been placed according to acoustic geometry, allowing wind to travel through the stone like breath through an organ. "Jonathan Ravenshore wasn't just an engineer," she murmured. "He was a composer." Late in the afternoon, as they moved deeper into the labyrinth, Balto stopped again this time, before a section of wall darker than the rest. She whined softly, pressed her nose to the seam, then pawed once. The lantern light revealed faint cracks, forming the outline of a circular panel. Caleb crouched, brushed away dust, and found a brass ring embedded in the stone. He hesitated only a moment before pulling. The ring turned with a low groan. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant vibration that filled the chamber, rising through the air in long, trembling waves. Evelyn's analyzer spiked. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's harmonic, controlled. It's responding to pressure change." The hum deepened, shifting pitch like the bow of a cello drawn across miles of air. Dust fell from the ceiling. The lantern flame flickered. Balto sat back, head tilted upward, eyes glowing faintly in the light. She gave one long, measured howl that seemed to join the resonance perfectly, matching its pitch. Then silence. Caleb felt his pulse hammering. "Tell me that wasn't just the wind." Evelyn stared at her screen, her voice barely audible. "That was a signal, a design signal. Someone or something just activated this place." They found an old wooden chest near the chamber's center. Inside, beneath crumbling cloth, was a sealed envelope marked with ink faded to brown. On it, in flowing script, were the words, "To the keeper who will hear again." Caleb broke the wax seal. Inside lay a single sheet of parchment, covered in steady handwriting. "If the winds grow silent, remember this. The voice of the sea will sleep until it is called by the faithful. When the 7 notes align, the storm will bow to the bell, and the lost shall find their way home. Trust the dog, for nature remembers what man forgets." Caleb read it twice, then looked at Balto. The husky stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on him, tail low, steady. "What does it mean?" he asked. Evelyn looked around the chamber. "It means Ravenshore Keep isn't just architecture. It's an instrument, a warning system, tuned to the world's breath. And maybe your dog already knows the song." They climbed back up as night fell. The storm clouds over the Atlantic glowed faintly violet in the distance. On the cliff above the keep, the wind rose again, stronger now, curling through the vents in low rolling tones. Martha Connolly was waiting by her bicycle when they emerged, coat wrapped tight around her shoulders. "So," she called, "did you wake the ghost?" Caleb glanced back at the castle, whose towers shimmered with the reflection of lightning far out at sea. "Not a ghost," he said quietly. "A heartbeat." The three of them stood listening as the first drops of rain began to fall. The hum rose again, deeper, richer, as if the keep were breathing in rhythm with the storm. Balto howled once more, long, proud, and unafraid. The wind answered, and for the first time since he'd come to Harbor's Rest, Caleb felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Hope. By dawn, the storm that had threatened all night finally broke. Rain lashed against the towers of Ravenshore Keep, and the ocean churned white beneath the cliffs. Caleb Merritt stood by the arched window, his reflection ghosted against the glass eyes dark, jaw clenched, the face of a man who'd seen too much war to believe peace ever lasted long. Below him, Balto paced restlessly, whining as thunder rumbled over the sea. The husky's fur stood on end. Her blue eyes flicked toward the northern vent, where a low vibration had started again. The castle was humming. Not softly this time, but like it was trying to warn them. A knock echoed through the hall. Caleb turned to see Sheriff Lorna Ray, water dripping from her hat brim, her uniform darkened by rain. She carried a folded document in one hand. "Morning, Merritt," she said grimly. "I wish I was here for coffee. Ironcrest Energy just filed a claim to survey the cliffs beneath your property. Says they're after mineral veins, but the tunnels run through those cliffs," Caleb finished. "Exactly. If they drill there, the entire system might collapse." Caleb took the paper and scanned it. The words blurred in his mind, but he caught the meaning permission to explore and extract. Signed and stamped. Legal theft. "They can't just take it," he said, voice tight. "They can if you let them," Lorna said. "But you've got a few friends now. People in town still remember what this place meant." She nodded toward the window. "They'll stand by you if you fight." The sheriff left as quickly as she came, her truck's tail lights vanishing into the rain. Caleb turned back to Balto. "Seems like peace doesn't come without a battle, huh, girl?" The dog gave a soft huff as if in agreement. Hours later, Evelyn Hart arrived, soaked and furious. Her eyes were alight with conviction as she dropped a stack of blueprints on the table. "They're lying," she said. "Ironcrest doesn't care about minerals. They're mapping subsonic pressure lines. They want to turn Ravenshore's acoustic system into a private energy field. They'll strip the rock until nothing's left." Caleb stared at her. "So what do we do?" "We prove what this place really is," she said. "A public safety relic, a national treasure. And if that fails, we protect it ourselves." Balto barked sharply, tail stiff, ears turned toward the cellar door. The hum beneath the floor deepened, pulsing like a heartbeat. Evelyn froze. "That's the same frequency as before? The keep's responding to atmospheric pressure." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Or to danger." He took his flashlight and headed for the cellar. The tunnels groaned as they descended. Drops of water fell from the ceiling like slow tears. The air was alive again, thick, electric. At the chamber's center, the brass valve gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Balto moved ahead, sniffing at the floor, then suddenly growled a deep warning sound. Caleb followed her gaze and saw it. A small black device half buried in mud, its red diode blinking. He knelt. "Evelyn, this isn't debris." She crouched beside him. "It's a seismic sensor, or worse, a charge." As if on cue, the hum of the keep rose in pitch. The lantern flickered violently. Balto barked and backed away, tail low but steady. Caleb's instincts kicked in, years of service boiling to the surface. He grabbed the device, ripped out the wires, and tossed it into a bucket of rainwater. The light went dead. Silence. Then the hum dropped again to its slow, deep tone, steady, protective. They climbed back upstairs. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Ironcrest planted explosives in your tunnels." "They don't care about the castle," Caleb said. "They just want what's under it." The next morning brought confrontation. A sleek black SUV rolled up the gravel drive, tires hissing through puddles. A man stepped out, immaculate in a gray suit. Grant Holloway, Director of Strategic Development at Ironcrest Energy. His smile was too polished to be sincere. "Mr. Merritt," he called pleasantly, holding out a gloved hand. "Let's talk like reasonable men." Caleb didn't take it. "You sent men to my property. They left more than footprints." Holloway's grin didn't waver. "We're a development company, not saboteurs. But since you've proven the keep has active systems beneath it, you might find our offer generous." He opened a folder and slid it across the wet stone of the entryway table. $1.5 million for the subterranean rights. You keep the house, the land, the view. We just take what you'll never use. Balto stepped forward, growling low. Her eyes locked on Holloway's with the cold focus of an animal that knew what men were capable of. "Beautiful dog," Holloway said lightly. "Shame loyalty doesn't pay the bills." Caleb's voice was quiet but sharp. "It pays in peace. Something you can't buy." He pushed the folder back. "The answer's no." Holloway's jaw twitched. "Think carefully, Mr. Merritt. The world doesn't need another stubborn soldier buried under sentiment." "Maybe not," Caleb said, "but it needs a few who remember what's worth fighting for." The SUV roared away, throwing gravel. That night the storm returned. The air grew thick and electric. Evelyn was in the library with her instruments when the reading spiked. "Pressure drop," she shouted. "They're triggering the vents again, manually." Caleb ran to the window. In the distance, he saw faint red lights along the ridge. Ironcrest's crew setting detonators near the northern cliffs. He grabbed his coat and the old lantern. "Stay inside," he ordered. Evelyn caught his arm. "You can't go alone." "I won't," he said, nodding toward Balto. "I've got backup." The rain cut sideways as he and the husky pushed through the courtyard and toward the ridge path. Every flash of lightning lit the rocks in blinding silver. The sound of the ocean crashed below like an army marching. When they reached the first ridge, Caleb saw the truth. Ironcrest had anchored small charges along the rock seams, each pulsing faint red through the rain. One wrong move, and the tunnels beneath Ravenshore would collapse into the sea. He knelt beside the nearest device, his hands steady despite the wind. He'd done this before, in deserts and cities far from home. Balto stood beside him, ears flattened against the rain. "Easy, girl," he murmured, "just like old times." He cut the first wire, then another. Sparks hissed, then died. Thunder rolled, masking the sound. He moved to the next. His fingers were numb, his body soaked, but his mind was clear. Behind him, Balto barked sharply a warning. Caleb turned just in time to see a figure on the cliff above, shadowed against the lightning flash. One of Holloway's men, crouched with a remote in hand. Caleb shouted, but the wind swallowed his voice. The man pressed the trigger too late. The ground shook, but not from the cliffs. A muffled explosion boomed far out over the water. Holloway's own barge, loaded with unshielded fuel, had detonated under the storm's static charge. The shock wave rolled across the waves, scattering fire into the rain. Back at the keep, the vibrations surged again. But this time, they weren't from destruction, they were music. The entire castle resonated, singing through the storm, each vent glowing faintly as lightning danced above the towers. Evelyn appeared at the window shouting, "Caleb, the castle's in harmony with the pressure wave. It's stabilizing the cliff." He turned toward her voice. Balto barked once, tail high. Together they ran back through the rain as the sound swelled, a single, pure tone rising above thunder. When they reached the courtyard, the storm shifted. The wind no longer screamed, it sang. Deep, steady, like a heartbeat through the sky. The aurora rare, this far south, burst green and violet above the waves. Caleb dropped to his knees, water streaming from his hair, and looked up at the glowing horizon. Balto pressed against his side, eyes reflecting the light. Evelyn joined them, breathless, awed. It's responding, she said. To us, to the storm, to everything. The keep stood firm, unbroken. Its hum filled the night, echoing for miles across the ocean. Somewhere beyond the storm, a fishing vessel altered course after picking up the resonance on sonar, a signal that would save their lives, though they'd never know where it came from. When the winds finally eased, silence settled over the cliffs like grace. Caleb looked toward the battered stone towers and whispered, "You did it, old friend." Bolto leaned her head against his shoulder, tail thumping once against the wet ground. Above them, the weather vane turned slowly north, and for the first time since his return from war, Caleb Merritt didn't feel like a man running from ghosts. He felt like a man standing exactly where he was meant to be. Spring came slowly to the coast of Maine. It arrived on the wind before it arrived in the trees, softening the ocean's voice, warming the gray stone of Ravenshore Keep, and carrying the smell of thawing earth up through the cliffs. For the first time in decades, the castle wasn't silent. It breathed. The storm had left its mark-broken shutters, cracked glass, and a few scorched stones. But it had also done something miraculous. It had awakened the keep. The ancient vents now hummed in low harmony when the sea shifted. The air itself seemed to glow with life. On a bright morning, Caleb Merritt stood at the parapet, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. Below him, the ocean sparkled like liquid glass. He could still hear the faint echo of the storm's song, carried miles away, circling back in the gull's cries. Beside him lay Balto, fur catching sunlight like silver. The husky had a new scar above her paw from scraping it on jagged stone during the night of the explosion, but she wore it like a medal. Her blue eyes followed every shift of the wind, every sigh from the sea. Down in the courtyard, Evelyn Hart worked with a group of school children from Harbor's Rest Elementary. She knelt by one of the great stone vents, showing them how to feel the faint vibration under their palms. The children gasped and laughed as the wind murmured through the keep's ancient passages. "When you listen," Evelyn told them, smiling, "you're hearing the world's oldest language, the voice of the earth. Ravenshore just helps it sing." One of the little boys asked, "Did the dog really save it?" Evelyn's smile softened. She and her human both did. Sometimes heroes come in pairs. From the balcony, Caleb watched her. For a long time, he'd believed he'd left all purpose behind in the desert sand. But now he saw it in the faces below, in the children tracing patterns in stone, in the old fishermen who came to donate what they could to restore the keep, and in Evelyn herself, whose laughter carried through the courtyard like a hymn. Later that afternoon, Martha Connolly sat under an oak tree near the gate, reading aloud from a restored copy of the Journal of Jonathan Ravenshore. Around her, a few retired sailors and townsfolk listened, their weathered faces tilted toward the sunlight. "Let those who follow the wind guard it," Martha read, "for the sea and sky are not enemies, but brothers who warn each other." She closed the journal gently. "He built this place to listen to the world. Seems to me it finally found someone who could." Caleb smiled quietly, tightening his jacket against the breeze. He'd spent months rebuilding the collapsed southern tower, reinforcing the tunnels beneath. The government had offered him a grant to turn Ravenshore into a research facility, a hub for weather and geological monitoring. When the letter arrived that morning, Evelyn had been thrilled. "Do you realize what this could mean, Caleb? National funding, a full team, preservation for decades." But he had only shaken his head. That's not what Ravenshore was built for. She'd frowned, confused. Then what? He had looked toward the ocean. To remind us that we don't own the wind. We only borrow its grace. Now sitting with Balto at his feet, he pulled the letter from his pocket once more. The seal from Washington glinted red in the sun. He read the offer again, then folded it neatly and tucked it away. The keep belonged to the people who listened, not the ones who measured. That evening, as twilight washed the sea in lavender light, The townsfolk gathered for what Martha called the listening hour. Lanterns flickered along the walls and benches were arranged facing the western cliffs. No speeches, no music, just silence. Caleb stood at the back beside Evelyn and Martha. The air was still, the kind of stillness that hums before something sacred. The children whispered to each other until Balto lifted her head, ears twitching. The husky stood, padded forward, and rested her paw gently against one of the stone vents. A low tone began to rise, not loud, not forced, but pure. The keep was singing again. A soft D note rolled through the air, joined by a second harmonic that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. The wind stirred, carrying the sound out across the Atlantic. Lanterns flickered, eyes filled with quiet wonder. Evelyn leaned close to Caleb. "It's not warning us anymore," she whispered. He nodded. "No, it's thanking us." The tone deepened, resonant and warm. Some of the older sailors closed their eyes. A few of the children reached out to touch the vibrating stone, giggling when they felt it hum beneath their fingertips. When the song faded, the night didn't feel empty. It felt blessed. The crowd slowly dispersed, voices hushed, as though afraid to break the spell. Martha patted Caleb's arm as she passed. "You know," she said softly, "they're calling you the new bellkeeper." Caleb chuckled under his breath. "Guess that makes Balto the real one." At that, the dog wagged her tail and barked once, short and sure, as if in agreement. Later, when the courtyard was quiet again, Caleb and Evelyn walked the perimeter together. The stars had come out, sharp against the clear sky. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The noise? The command? The life before this?" Caleb looked toward the ocean. The water glowed faintly under the rising moon. "I used to think silence was punishment," he said, "but now I think it's mercy. You just have to learn how to hear it." Evelyn smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You think the world ever stops talking?" He shook his head. "No, we just stopped listening." They stood there for a long time. The wind moved gently through the pine trees and over the stones, carrying with it the faintest echo of a melody, the same one that had saved the keep months ago. Balto stretched out by the gate, eyes half closed, breathing slow and content. The brass tag on her collar caught the moonlight, guardian of Ravenshore. When they finally turned to go inside, Caleb paused and glanced back one last time. The castle glowed faintly in the darkness, its towers like watchful sentinels over the sleeping sea. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a man haunted by the past. He felt like a man chosen by it. He whispered, "Thank you." The breeze answered, carrying a whisper through the arches, almost words but not quite, something between wind and prayer. Some inherit money, some inherit land, but the rarest inheritance of all is the one that teaches you how to listen again. As dawn approached, the first light touched the sea, and the keep gave one final, gentle sigh, a low, contented hum that rippled across the water like a benediction. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the world listened back. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen, often in silence, carried by the wind. Subscribe now and join us for more true-to-life tales of courage, love, and faith that never fades.